What happened to Rave Master? Rave Master, or just Rave, was Hiro Mashima's first big manga and it did pretty well, but it never blew up like Fairy Tail and nobody really talks about it anymore. So in this video I'd like to talk about some of the issues with Rave, how it became so popular, and why it would become the inspiration for all of Mashima's stories. Now I just finished Rave for the first time. I had started it like a year ago, taken a break, read pieces of it while reading Eden Zero, but I finally sat down and read the whole thing. And there's a lot of things I like about it, like the characters, the fights, and the goofiness. But as an English reader in the US, one thing I hate about this series is how ridiculous it is to get your hands on this manga. So in case you don't know, Rave, like Fairy Tail, is published by Kodansha. Kodansha does not have a convenient service like Viz does. Viz, which has the license for Weekly Shonen Jump, lets you pay, what is it, like $2 a month, and you can read as many manga as you want. Kodansha also has an app where you can read their manga, but instead of just paying a subscription, they basically lock it behind this convoluted mobile game. Long story short, they make it so that you can only read like 6 chapters a day. So if you're like me and you want to binge the manga, then you're forced to look at other alternatives. Which also sucks because even on scan sites, there's big gaps in the chapters. I can only speak for English scans, but there's more than a few gaps in chapters, and some of them are like 20 chapters long. Physical volumes seem tricky to get your hands on from what I can tell, and you can buy the digital volumes from Kodansha, but it's like $8 a volume and there's 35 volumes. So if you want to get into Rave, then just brace yourself because it's not going to be as easy as just picking up the manga and binging it. It's certainly not impossible, but it's just not easy. Especially if you want to do the right thing and read the official manga. Now, you do have the anime, and for a lot of people watching this video, that might have been your first impression of Rave. The series got an anime adaptation that ran in the Toonami lineup in like 2005-2006. It got a 52 episode run, meaning just like a lot of those early 2000s shows, it only adapted the early part of the story. So if you want to get the whole story, at some point you're gonna have to read the manga. I can't speak to the quality of the dub or the show overall, but it does look okay. I haven't watched the anime myself. I have heard some people say they watched it back in the day and they liked it. I don't think it's on any streaming platforms, but you can either buy the DVDs or watch it online. Either way, it's not easy to watch the anime, and it's certainly not easy to read the manga, which is why I think it never really blew up in the West. You look at Fairy Tail, and it's all over the place. It's in every store and on basically every streaming site. And of course, everyone likes the story, so you can imagine why it would be more popular globally than Rave. But I would also argue part of this is because of how Rave starts off. Actually, before I say more on that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Anyway, early Rave is, well, it's a bit of a shock. Obviously, Mashima is known for his iconic art style, and granted before I would look at early Fairy Tail and be like, what the hell is that? But then I started Rave Master and I was like, oh wow. When you see how Rave looks in the beginning, all you can really say is that looks amateurish. It kinda looks like something you would draw in your notebook in 2nd grade instead of taking notes. Now, you do need to keep in mind that unlike a lot of mangaka like Oda or Horikoshi, Mashima was never an assistant. In other words, he didn't get to work alongside a veteran prior to making his own manga. He just made some one-shots and then bam, Rave. Plus, he started Rave at a very young age. He basically started his career right after high school, so you can understand why his art might have looked amateurish. But it's not just the art. The plot for Rave is also basic too. Mashima, like many manga readers, loves video games, and the plot for Rave comes off as like a 2000s RPG for the PlayStation. So you have Haru, the main character, in a small town. He gets a literal hero's calling. He's told that there was a war between the good guys and the bad guys, and he needs to become the next hero to stop the bad guys. Obviously, I'm being kinda cheeky, but it's really not that far off. I mean, the early chapters are like, hey, let's go to this town. Haru will meet a new character. And then they'll be like, oh hey, this bad guy's hurting the town because he's looking for the Darkbring. The Darkbrings are like the bad guy weapons, by the way. They're being sought out by Demon Card. Again, kind of on the nose. And not for nothing, but especially in early Rave, they feel very similar to Team Rocket. Like, hey, we're the bad guys, we're doing bad guy things, arrr. Now, this isn't to say early Rave is bad. Once you get over the art and the silly plot, it's actually really fun to read. Rave is basically like a fantasy, but it's like an anything goes fantasy. So there's swords and magic, but there's also cars, planes, dinosaurs, dragons, all kinds of stuff. It's a lot like Dragon Ball because the characters will meet someone new and go from one wacky town to another as they travel the world and go on different quests. So if you love early Dragon Ball, then you'll probably get a sense of nostalgia reading Rave. Plus, while they might look a bit silly, the characters are pretty good in early Rave. It takes some time before they mature, but all of the character dynamics are there. You have Haru, the main character, who is a bit basic, but he's actually pretty cool. You also have Musica, who's the older friend who can manipulate Silver into whatever he wants. He's kinda like the cool guy because he's tall, good looking, and he smokes, and he's got piercings. And of course you have Ellie, who is kinda the best character at this point. She is a bit of an airhead, but she stands out because she has these weird batons that work like guns, and she also likes to gamble and visit casinos. Naturally, you can see how these three make a pretty iconic team, which at least in my opinion drives the early part of the story. In my experience, the manga is a bit of a slow burn until about volume 7, when we get to the Tower of Din arc. This is the end of what I would call early Rave, where Haru meets his dad and helps him fight the leader of Demon Card, and they have this big epic battle at a tower full of demons. Needless to say, it's a pretty cool arc. But more than that, it's the first big transition for Rave. Here you get some slight improvements in the art. You get some of the best fights in the series that set the tone for the story later on. And from here the story goes from very basic to something with a bit more personality. In fact, I would say the story gets drastically better from here on out. Whereas before you had a pretty basic story, later on you get a ton of crazy moments. Now, I'm not going to spell everything out, but there are a few things I need to talk about. So if you're not caught up, then this next part of the video will contain some spoilers. One thing that I thought was crazy was the reveal for Lucia. I mean, we just beat the big bad, and then his son, the blonde devil, shows up, kisses Haru's girlfriend, and then smokes everyone. I mean, talk about villain introductions. After that, we get the mermaid arc, which, you know, is okay. We get some new villains, and the fights are pretty good. We do get the dramatic conclusion of Musica's storyline with Reina, which I personally really liked. But after this arc, we get one of Mashima's coolest arcs in any of his manga. Sighart, who's basically Jalal, shows up to his hometown where he's betrayed and has to fight 1,000 mages. So he whips out a magic absorption sword and knocks out all 1,000 mages. Then he beats the leader of the mages in one blow. Then he fights the evil mage that manipulated everything for 7 days without stopping before beating him. I know everyone likes to quote the Erza thing where she fought 100 demons, but 1,000 mages is pretty freaking cool. There's a ton more moments, but like I said, I don't want to spoil every little thing. On that note, I think it's only fair that I share my thoughts on how this story compares to Fairy Tail. One thing I like better is the plot. While Fairy Tail has the stronger start, Rave Master's pacing is much better. I mean, they will literally roadmap everything in the plot so you always know where the story is headed, and the story never veers from that path. Plus, arcs are relatively concise in this series. So all in all, Rave reads really well. It doesn't feel rushed, but it never drags on. There's also something to be said for the art. If you're someone who loves Fairy Tail's earlier art style, then you might actually like Rave better than Fairy Tail. Obviously, Fairy Tail went through a lot of changes as well. Now, one thing I'm kinda stuck on are the characters. Generally speaking, I think Fairy Tail has the better characters, but this is kind of an unfair comparison. First of all, because Fairy Tail is just a bigger story, so there's more of an investment there. But also because Fairy Tail is Mashima's second series. With Rave, Mashima was still growing as a writer, so even by the end, the characters were somewhat basic. But I'd say Rave had some great characters by the end. Admittedly, I think the cast just got a little too big. I mean, there are a ton of great characters in Rave, so you could argue that Mashima could have used the time introducing them to just flesh out his other characters. But the cast still has a great dynamic by the end that has a lot of similar vibes to Natsu's group in Fairy Tail. The characters are different ages and come from different backgrounds, so it leads to a lot of interesting interactions. Plus, no dynamic is better than that between Haru and Ellie. Just as an example, there's one chapter where they're all stressed for the big battle, so Haru meets Ellie and she explains that she might never see him again, so the two of them talk all night. I know it's pretty corny, but it shows how they have real chemistry, and it's still one of Mashima's best romantic relationships in any of his stories. And it's why a lot of people love Rave. So for that, the art, the wacky world, and a bunch of other reasons, I highly recommend checking out Rave. But now I'd like to hear what you think. What was your first impression of Rave? How would you rate it? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my video on Fire Force. In that video, I talk about the current state of the Fire Force series. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.